Hello, thank you for coming, and it's good to see, I'm getting to meet lots of people I only knew from the internet, and also getting to see some old friends here as well, so this is a blast. It's funny that Mary mentions the talk title because, we submitted these like 10 months ago, and so the second part is right. The first part, well, maybe I'm getting some of what I want, but I guess not all of it, so I guess that's still accurate. This last week actually marks a year since I joined Indeed. I highly recommend proposing talks about your year at Indeed when you've only worked there for 2 months. So it was about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, that I started my job at Indeed. My first day is forever captured on my badge, which of course I have to look at every single day. I woke up the day before my first day with allergies so bad that I literally couldn't open one of my eyes. Just was like stuck. And so thankfully by the Monday, I just looked like I had been crying all night instead of that. So this is a fun reminder for me of just like that the fact that a year has passed and the fact that Cedar is way less bad in Austin in 2017 than it was in 2016, because I'm not crying and dying right now. And if you haven't heard of Indeed, a lot of people haven't heard of Indeed, especially in the tech world. It may be one of the larger successful consumer-facing internet sites that you haven't heard of. We are job search. We help people get jobs. And every month we help a little over 200 million people look for a new job in countries around the world. And so 200 million, more than 200 million uniques. I'm not sure exactly how much more I'm allowed to say than that, but more than 200 million job seekers use Indeed every month. And I joined Indeed a year ago to lead its front-end engineering practice, which is kind of funny because when I joined Indeed, there was no front-end engineering practice. And Indeed had been around since 2004, had been really incredibly successful by just hiring smart full-stack engineers, really smart full-stack engineers. And obviously front-end engineering was happening. You can't make a website without writing code that runs in a browser. But the care and attention that people were giving to writing good front-end code really varied from developer to developer and from project to project. And sometimes you would have people paying a lot of attention to how to do something the best and most performant and maintainable way. But often you had people who were just writing the front-end code that would ship the feature or fix the bug, and then they would move on. And so what I want to talk about today is kind of the work that I've done and the lessons that I've learned in the last year as I tried to bring a front-end culture and build a front-end organization at Indeed. This talk isn't particularly about front-end, although if you want to talk about creating a front-end culture and a front-end organization at wherever you work, let's talk. But I wanted to make this more general. So the things that I'm going to talk about today aren't really necessarily about front-end engineering, but there are some things that are unique to my experience that I wanted to call out because they might change. I think they definitely influenced how I approached this and how successful I've been able to be. So number one, I was brand new at a rapidly growing company. I think that driving change at a company where you have worked for years is different for sure, and potentially even harder than showing up for the purpose of change. I don't think that, I know it because I tried to do this at a previous company and it didn't work so well to be 3 years in and say, I know, let's change everything. So that was an advantage I had, I think. I also came from a non-traditional background. My background ranges from bartending to waitressing to doing desktop publishing at a newspaper for 5 years to finally moving to software engineering and specifically front-end engineering. And the people that I work with at Indeed, the few hundred software engineers, tend to come from a very traditional background and also tend to be we have a lot of people, we have really shockingly low attrition. And so we have a lot of people who have worked in Indeed for a long time, and it's the only job that they've ever had. And so I was able to bring a kind of new perspective and new thought to how we approach engineering in general. Sorry for the sniffling, it's just part of the whole allergy thing. The third thing is that I was working, and this was a really, for the most part, a really huge benefit, I think. I was working with a culture that was incredibly data-driven. We have whole conversations that are basically people passing around URLs to queries that we run that show a pretty graph of how some experiment has influenced some key metric. So we're incredibly data-driven. We're not just data-driven, we're also mission-driven. We have this mission of helping people get jobs. And so we also like to make money, but we actually use data to make decisions to help people make jobs, sometimes even when that makes us less money. So we're very data-driven, very mission-driven. And this was something that I think is helped me be successful in this role. And the last thing that I want to mention is this: I'm female. And I just want to recognize that, because I think that I can't point to any particular way that this changed how people thought about what I was saying or how people responded to me. But I do think that there is something notable about trying to influence change in an organization when you're a minority in that organization versus when you're part of the majority. So for the next little bit, I want to talk about kind of 8 lessons that I've taken away from this last year of trying to really elevate and legitimize front-end engineering in a culture of really smart people who weren't necessarily paying attention to front-end engineering before. I actually have like 20 lessons that I wish I could share, but I also only have 30 minutes. So we're gonna talk about 8 of these. And I definitely didn't know all of this going into my job. This is a lot of stuff that I have figured out, sometimes the hard way along the way. But hopefully if you're in a similar situation or thinking about finding yourself in a similar situation, this can give you a little bit of a head start. So to the extent that I have been successful, I owe a lot of that success, I think, to the fact that I've had a really good sponsor throughout this entire process. And saying, start with a sponsor is sort of like saying, well, if you want to be rich, then just start with $1 million, and that'll help. Because it's kind of that kind of lift that you get from having somebody who is willing to invest their own political and social capital in your success. And when I talk about political and social capital, I don't mean they throw their weight around and tell people what to do and say, you better listen to Rebecca. It's more that they can share their institutional knowledge and share what they know about the business and the relationships that they have, and that they gift that to you in order to help you be successful. Importantly, a good sponsor, in my mind, doesn't tell you what to do. They don't say, you need to go improve the performance of the search results page in the job search application in India. They help you figure out how to figure out what you should be doing. And then as you figure it out and as you come up with ideas, they validate or invalidate those ideas for you through conversation. They really are a sponsor, not a good manager does all these things too, so I don't want to say they're not a manager. My sponsor actually is my manager. I don't think that's necessarily true. But importantly, they are there to support you, to reorient you when you need to be reoriented, but they are giving you a lot of freedom, and that's something that has been really critical, I think, to my success. Like I mentioned, when I started at Indeed, I was brand new, didn't really know anybody. At my previous job, I'd been there about 3 years, and I had reached that point where pretty much everyone in engineering knew who I was and would wave at you or smile at you or whatever. And now I was in a bigger company, and it was like high school. It was a bigger company, and I'm literally trying to figure out where I sit in the cafeteria at the same time that I'm trying to figure out how to do my job. And I bring that up because there wasn't, by the very nature of my job, the fact that I was there to create something that didn't exist meant that my people, there wasn't a front-end organization for me to go sit with. There wasn't the cool front-end club that I could go join. I kind of had to find my people. And that involved getting a bit more creative about how I thought about who my people are. Historically, it had been my people are the people who write JavaScript because they realize that it's a good language and not a scary one. And now I had to think a bit differently about that. And so this was about finding allies in change, people who had also been participating in an effort to change things. And it was about finding allies in cross-product influence, people who had to operate across products, not just within one. A really obvious example that I hope I don't have to say out loud, but I will anyway, is QA. If you haven't made best friends with your QA organization and advocated for them and helped strengthen them, go home and do that. QA was a great resource for me to understand, to kind of start to plug into how the organization worked, how all the pieces of software worked together. And they were such a great source of product knowledge and understanding kind of where the skeletons might be buried. Another great group for me to work with was our release engineering group. They are responsible for building and maintaining the tools that let us put software in production. This is a really interesting gatekeeping group because in order to get software in production at Indeed, it goes through their system. These are the people who have the unenviable task of maintaining, say, Jenkins. And so that was a group that had a lot of experience with working across products, developing systems that would work across products. They don't know anything about front-end engineering. Have you seen Jenkins? But they had a lot of experience with influencing and steering the behavior of product teams, sometimes through polite nudges, like, hey, we added this plugin, or hey, we added this new capability to Jira or whatever, and sometimes by saying, you have 1 month to increase your unit test coverage or else your builds are going to start failing. And so this was another great group for me to work with, again, because they had cross-product influence. And so looking for these people who, like I said, they didn't know anything about front-end engineering, but they were operating in the same space of trying to influence people across teams and having visibility into what was going on across teams. And they were good for telling me what worked for them and also telling me who else I should talk to, and also giving me systems that I could plug into in order to achieve the change that I wanted to see. One of my first challenges at Indeed was figuring out, I said that it's a really data-driven company and that we help people get jobs and that's our mission, and we measure everything we do against whether it's achieving that mission. And so I had to figure out what was the connection between the change that I wanted to see and that mission and the things that we cared about as a business. It wasn't enough that my boss/sponsor thought this was a good idea. I needed a way to talk about this with the business, with all the people in the business, product, engineering, UX. Haven't talked to sales yet. We have a pretty strong wall between sales and engineering. But I had to figure out how to talk to all these different people about why this work mattered to them. And it's pretty hard to hypothesize how improving and standardizing our Webpack build system is going to help people get jobs. I thought about that one for a good long time. Never quite came up with an answer to that. But way too late in the process, I learned that as sort of tent poles for that helping people get jobs mission, the product organization had arrived at this idea that if we build experiences that are simple, that are comprehensive, that are relevant, and that are fast, then that will help us serve that mission. That those were kind of our product principles that guided how we thought about building product. And I was like, fast, that I can help with. And it gave me this context to be able to talk about why this work was important. And I was able to use our pretty nifty tools to pull up the graph of the render time of the search results page in India for the last year and how it had been getting worse and worse and worse and worse because we had been progressively not paying attention to the impact of the front-end code that we were writing and not paying attention to the fact that that was damaging the performance of our pages. And then it's actually really easy to say there's a straight line between there are people who are getting frustrated while they're trying to find a job. And that's a bad experience. And front-end engineering can fix that. And so I was able to start telling those stories and not just tell the stories, but start saying, we weren't paying attention to this and that was damaging. If we start paying attention to this, these are not actually hard problems to fix. And we were able to get our 90th percentile render time for the search results page in India down from about 8 seconds down to like 3 or 4 by just paying attention to front-end engineering. And that was this like, oh, this is a thing that all these smart people weren't doing. But now that we have front-end expertise in-house, and now that we're thinking about this, like this actually impacted the product. It wasn't just about making pixels prettier and like, ooh, we wrote good CSS instead of bad CSS. It's like this actually materially impacted the experience of our users. One kind of lesson that I had to learn about this is to really focus on moving what matters. So early on, I was working with a team that was working on a new product and trying to find product market fit and trying to just find their legs and work on user acquisition and conversion. And I showed up and was like, you should do better at front end, because I say so. That actually created a lot of tension and created a lot of negative feelings around the work that I was trying to do and the change that I was trying to bring, because the change that I was trying to bring was disruptive. And so by remembering to focus on moving what matters, focusing on this flagship experience and the user experience there, I started to build basically case studies, not literally paper case studies that I can hold up, but build case studies that are influencing how teams working on other products think from the start, because they don't want to have to pay that cost. But figuring out where to target your energies and figuring out what to ignore was a really important thing for me. Once I knew what I was doing, and this took a long time before I knew what I was doing and knew how to think about this and talk about this, but once I knew what I was doing, I needed to figure out how to tell people what I was doing and how to get other people on board with the work that I was doing and the change that I was trying to bring. And it was important to impress upon people the full scope of what I meant when I was talking about a front-end engineering practice and focusing on front-end engineering best practices and standardizing front-end engineering practices across products. Because again, a lot of people, their experience with front-end was, one time I had to build a button and it had to have a gradient on it and it had to have rounded corners and I got really angry. And that was that was all they had ever thought of, and they had developed this really pretty negative opinion of what it meant to work on the front end. And so I'm really excited for Laura Hogan's talk in a little bit, because I think she's going to talk some about this too. I had to really be prepared to give spontaneous presentations at breakfast, in the hallway, in the elevator, about what front-end engineering actually was. And that, no, it's not just about like making the rounded corners and the gradient on the button, because actually I hate that part too. But it's about the operationalization of front end. It's about monitoring for JavaScript errors. It's about monitoring in real time for performance. It's about introducing steps into our build process that don't let you write unmaintainable CSS, or at least they don't let you ship it. And it's not just about pixels on the screen, but it's about a lot more than that. And I actually had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with an engineer at breakfast, where suddenly I was giving a presentation about my job. I thought I was just eating yogurt. But I had a conversation with an engineer at breakfast just a couple of weeks ago, and you could see him go from like, blah, 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 UX, 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 to like, I want to help you. I want to help you do this, because I didn't know how good you could be at this. I didn't know that this was even a thing that you could be good at, or that it was as complicated as you're explaining, that there is so much to it. And so being prepared for those conversations starts to build up you're just one person, but being prepared to have those conversations and to spontaneously generate advocates for yourself is a really, really big deal. Speaking of that, every summer at Indeed, we bring in all of our new college hires, and they come to Austin for the summer last summer, there were between 80 and 90 of them came to Austin for the whole summer. They work on product ideas, that they generate their own product ideas, build the products, iterate on them for a few weeks. And at the end of the summer, a few products turn into real things that we continue to invest in. And in 2015, we did this with a slightly smaller number of new hires. But in 2015, we did this, and we had infrastructure for A/B testing and for logging and for monitoring and for deployment and for everything that you think of when it comes to building the back end of an application. But when it came to the things that you need to build the front end of an application, they were like, just Google it, you'll figure it out. We hadn't built any infrastructure for them around being successful in the front end. And so the 2015 class left that feeling like front end was really hard. Front end was hard, I didn't get any help. And so they went into the world, and these are people, remember, no one ever quits Indeed. And so these are people who are gonna be here for a long time. And they went into the world thinking that front end was bad and hard and unpleasant. And so I saw this as a really big opportunity in 2016 to seed our population of engineers with people who didn't feel negatively about front end. And I left the product that I was really disruptive on and said, I'm gonna go all in on making sure that they have a good experience. And so that was around bootstrapping tools, a very simple component library so that they could get a very simple UI set up with minimal effort, and other tools like that just made for more of a roadmap for here's how you build a new front-end experience at Indeed, rather than just going to Google and learning about Webpack and crying. So this was like I said, this was a huge opportunity, and there were 80 or 90, I always want to call them kids, but they're not kids. And I want to say students, but they're not students. They're participants, I think is the word that we finally came up with for these like new and eager college hires. 80 to 90 of them, and when they left that program at the end of the summer, we asked them, like, what are you interested in doing next? What team do you want to work on? What tech do you want to work on? And approximately a third of them expressed an interest in front-end work at the end of that summer. And I got a big bonus. So that was cool. But the lesson there was to give people a positive experience with a small dose of the change that you're trying to create. And then I created this whole, well, granted just a third of 90, which isn't that many, but it was more than zero, an army of people who went out to our 5 offices and they cared about front end, and they knew it was something they could be good at, and they knew it was something they could expect other people to be good at too. And they knew that they had a resource, and it created this, my boss warned me, he's like, you're gonna build these things and your problem is going to be that people are going to use them. And he was right, because I created this set of people who were really excited about good front-end tooling, and then I had to support that. This was a hard lesson for me. So I built this tooling, I built this component library, this UI component library for the Indeed University participants. And it was such a success at Indeed University that I wanted to bring it out to more of Indeed. I wanted to tell people, you should use this because it really sped up the process of building new products at Indeed University. And the lesson that I learned is the fact that I had a repo that you could install and you got cool UI was really insufficient. I needed the people and the process in place in order to really make that successful outside of this little short-term Indeed University project. And I didn't have that. I hadn't lined up UX, I hadn't lined up product, and so engineers wanted to use these tools that I had built, but UX was designing experiences that didn't match up with them, and product wasn't supportive of the time that it was taking to incorporate these new tools. And so this was a really big lesson for me that telling the code is insufficient because telling a computer is really easy. Telling a computer what to do is really easy at the end of the day, but telling people what to do is a lot harder. And so this was one of my biggest takeaways, is that I needed to be invested a lot more in the people and the process and not so focused on building out the tech. This kind of naturally leads into the next thing, and this is the other side of move what matters. I mentioned that in moving what matters, don't be disruptive if it's not worth it. But also, I really had to learn to make some people sad. Once people started to learn about front end and started to think of it as a first-class citizen and think of it as something that they wanted to be good at, there was a lot of demand for my time. And I hadn't yet done the work to put an organization in place around me that could make me scale. I was still just one person, but I had created way more demand for me and the expertise that I brought to Indeed. And so at the end of last year, I had to get really focused on what actually mattered and get really focused on my priorities for the quarter and my priorities for the year. And I have a document now that I go back to almost weekly, probably, to make sure that I'm still working on the right things and to make sure that I'm saying no to the right things too. Because at the end of the year, I got into this situation where I was trying to figure out I was so excited about the enthusiasm that I was seeing, that I was trying to figure out how to say yes to everyone. And that meant that I was saying yes to everyone, but not delivering on anything at all, even those high priority things. And so that's been a good lesson for me too, that you have to prioritize where you invest this effort, especially when you're just one person like I was, because in the end, at the end of last year, it all worked out, but at the end of last year, I was just disappointing a lot of people and not making anyone really super happy because I wasn't doing a good job of prioritizing. So it's okay to disappoint some people, disappoint the right people, disappoint people according to your priorities and your goals, but it's important to disappoint some people. You can't, once you get this excitement, that's a necessary part of sustaining it. You can't make everyone happy. The last thing, and this I wrote this in my notebook sometime toward the end of the year, because I was sitting at my desk and looking at LinkedIn profiles and writing notes about how to interview front-end engineers and leveling and career growth and how the team should be organized and would they report to me or how this, and I was like, what am I doing? I used to write JavaScript. And I've had a lot of those sorts of moments. Some of them are fun, and some of them are like, stab me. I've had a lot of those moments, and I think that Aaron, hopefully that's right, I'm bad at names, like Aaron was saying earlier, this transition from individual contributor to something more than that, whatever it is, manager, lead person, can be a hard one. It's been a hard one for me, especially when I'm spending so much of my time talking to people. And I know that's valuable, but I look back at my week and when I'm thinking about what I've done this week, I'm looking at my calendar and not looking at Jira. And it's a weird feeling, and I don't have a solution for it. It's just sort of part of transitioning to being in charge of stuff. So I want to leave you with this. As I've been thinking about all of this and doing this, I was talking a lot about cultural change and we need to change the culture. We need to introduce this front-end culture. And finally, my wonderful boss pulled me aside and he's like, Rebecca, you've got to stop talking about changing the culture. People like the culture. You've got to stop. And Camille's talk this morning sort of resonated with me when she was like, people were scared of me. People were probably a little scared of me. You've got to stop talking about changing the culture. People like the culture. And we arrived, instead of talking about changing the culture, we arrived at this, using the culture to influence the change that I wanted to see. And that was just this real aha moment. And everything else, is going to be specific to your particular situation, your particular company. But this is really, I could have just put this slide up and walked away and you could have clapped. Because this is it. Use the culture to influence the change that you want to see. I'm Rebecca. Thanks for having me.